So we're going to get started now. The first question that we're asking is, what is a communication mindset? And you've probably heard a lot nowadays about mindset. We've got the growth versus the fixed mindset and what mindset really is. So we're going to define it as the established set of attitudes held by someone. So think about attitudes. And then it's a collection of beliefs that shape your thought habits. And I know for me, if I need to develop some kind of new routine, new habit, that it will take a while to do that. And so what we've discovered over the years around mindset is we can intentionally change someone's mindset. We can also change our mindset. And when we think about each of us, we're considering or calling ourselves an influencer. And so when you have a certain mindset, a certain set of attitudes and beliefs, then we want you to consider that the people that you're working with or who you're trying to influence or change their mind have the same thing. And so when we consider a communication mindset, we're going to start by embracing these issues. The belief that everyone communicates, you saw that in one of our first slides. That's pivotal to how this work unfolds, because if we're questioning the ability of one of our students to communicate or not, or are they really communicating, that's going to shift our perception of them and how we're going to interact with them. We also want to create a communicatively expectant environment. And we'll talk next about a perception wheel that we follow, but a lot of it has to do with our expectation of what do we want to happen in the environment, and are we assuming that the students we serve truly are communicating? Are we expecting it? The other thing we know is that we want an atmosphere, a mindset that says opportunities to demonstrate purposes and functions of communication are vital. We want to assume that's going to happen. We want to set into place opportunities for that to happen and the strategies to support our students to truly do that. And the last piece we're going to talk about is the Communication Bill of Rights, and we'll do that a little bit later. What does that look like, and what kinds of rights do we see our students having as communicators? So this is our perception wheel. And what we know is our perceptions drive or influence and impact our expectations, whether it's in an educational setting, in a home setting. How we perceive something then is a resultant in our expectations in that place. We also know that expectations drive opportunity. So if we expect our students to communicate, we're very likely to give them opportunities to do that, right? If we're expecting people are going to sit down at our dinner table to eat, right, then we're going to provide the food for them to do that. We also know that opportunities result in achievement. So if I have multiple opportunities to learn how to drive a stick shift, I'm very bad at it. I have no motor memory. Right? The more opportunities I have, the more likelihood that I'm going to be able to drive a stick shift. And I'm going to be able to get up that hill or drive to work with my new car that happens to be a stick shift. As a resultant of the achievement, our perception of that student or whatever the situation is going to change. Because if they've achieved something, if they're in a different current state, then we start that cycle again. So here's another way of representing that wheel. It was originally created by Dr. Carol Zangari on a website called Practical AAC. And if you really love AAC, you would want to get on that. They have incredible ideas, and it's pretty user-friendly. 5 ways to do this, or 6 ways to do this, or how to think about this. But here's another way of thinking about this perception wheel. By asking some of these questions, how I perceive you and your abilities, then that impacts and helps set the expectations I have for you, which then shapes the learning opportunities that I offer you. And that fuels your learning and achievement, which then shapes how people perceive you, right? So it's this very nice cyclical perception or cyclical approach to thinking about how we're perceiving our students. So we have Lisa here, who was an AAC consultant and now a literacy consultant. We also have Kristen Strong, who's joined us, and she is also an AAC consultant here. Would any of you like to make any comment about the impact this perception wheel has had on your work as you've shared it?
Well, I think definitely, when you perceive someone as not having a lot in the way of ability, you don't offer them a whole lot of opportunities to learn stuff. And I've seen that in, I start one of the ways that I learned, honed my AAC skills was working with students who are severely multiply impaired. And when I started in the program, I could see that the kids weren't getting opportunities to do, to communicate, to try different things. So, changing my perception of like, they can do it. Let's offer them the opportunity and see what happens, was a better way to go about things. But in the beginning, we weren't offering them enough opportunities for them to, how do we know they can't if we've never offered them the opportunity to try? So, I guess that's my piece of it. I don't know if Lisa has anything to add.
Yeah, I think sometimes I have the same background as Kristen and with students with severe multiple impairments. And sometimes, well, because we offer things, it may seem like they don't know it. And so we try not to offer them as much, but a lot of times it's more thinking, okay, if I truly believe that they can learn and they can communicate, then I'm going to change what I do, not try to make the student fit and do what I think they should do. Because it's not working for them. So it's more, my perception is you can do this, and I'm going to figure out a way to make it where you are able to do what I know that you can do. So hope that makes sense.
I really like both of those comments because again, it puts it on us rather than on the student. It basically says we need to figure this out and help them figure out what it looks like to communicate versus, well, they can't do it, right? They aren't giving us anything. So think about how you might use this perception wheel. I have teams that will sit down, especially in the beginning of the year or maybe after Christmas, and say, so how are you perceiving this student? What are you thinking about? Because oftentimes one of us in a classroom or in a situation will see some incredible action of a child, like they show up amazing, and we need to be able to share that with others because okay, wow, I've never imagined that. I know I worked in the schools for years, and I would have parents come in and I would be talking about their young child. I worked with early childhood with complex kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they did this amazing thing, and the parents like, there is no way they ever did that. They don't do anything like that for me, right? They don't pick up the toys. They don't do anything. And so sometimes we perceive them differently in the different environments that they're in. So the perception was a really nice tool to use. So what we're talking about today is augmentative and alternative communication, AAC. So the ASHA definition, so we try to bring in some of the content, the research and how we've ended up where we are in the field. So AAC includes all forms of communication other than oral speech that are used to express thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. We all use AAC when we make facial expressions, gestures, use symbols, pictures when we write. I know many of you might be that individual that if I tied your hands down, you'd be like, okay, I really can't communicate anymore, right? Or I have friends that like doodle on pages and stuff, and it's like their way of interacting. And then they have this beautiful picture when they're done. So we need to consider that all of us use a variety of forms of communication. So we never want to limit our students to just one or two. Another term you might hear is complex communication needs. And that's a recommended term that has come out of an organization called ISAC, an International Society for AAC. And that organization has many, many individuals that use AAC as their main means of communication. And so they're having an opportunity to influence our field and help us think about it a bit differently. And so if you'll notice what's missing about this description are disability terms. right? So terms, like severely and impaired and disabled. And so they preferred complex communication needs as a representation of the way they communicate and the challenges that they're confronted with. So one thing we know about AAC is that in the past, many people have put prerequisites around those individuals that we think may or may not be a good candidate for AAC. And we want to kind of blow that myth right out of the water. And we want to say, if you're breathing, then you're a candidate for AAC. And our colleague, Dr. Karen Erickson, would say, and if you're not even breathing on your own, right? So you can be on a vent and you still are a candidate for AAC. So there are no prerequisites. The biggest challenge we have is figuring out how to support those students that are that have complex bodies or complex needs or complex behavior, but we need to start as quickly as possible to support them. So at Oakland Schools, years ago, we decided we needed to choose an overarching goal or outcome for the individuals that we serve. And so what we said is our expected outcome is that they would become competent communicators. And so I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about what you would describe as a competent communicator. What might they look like? And this is not using their verbal speech. This is using AAC or some other type of means of communication. What might we be looking for if we're just want to describe them as a competent communicator?
Pause your video and answer the question on slide 6 of your workbook.
So one thing I always think about is them being able to express their opinions on something, right? To comment, to have an opinion, because what we know is they have opinions, right? But are they able to share those? Feel more confident in communication? Absolutely. So I'm going to share with you a description that we at Oakland Schools have coined, and we've adapted it from other people's view and thoughts about it. A competent communicator can communicate what they want, when they want, to whomever they want, in the way that they want, in a timely manner, fulfilling the purposes and functions of communication. We're going to talk a little bit later about those purposes and functions. But you can see it's pretty all-encompassing, right? We want them to be communicators, just like people that can use their natural speech to communicate. So what does a competent communicator look like? This is a lovely slide that lets us think about what that might be. So we want to communicate what they want. And so here we see something, it's hilarious, right? They're having a joke between them. They're sharing something wonderful. We have our friend, Felicia Bowers. She gave a TED Talk. So to whomever they want, right? Like to be able to communicate with a variety of partners. And then when they want, so they're choosing 2 chocolate cupcakes, please. That's right after my heart. Like I'm about ready to be wanting some cupcakes today. But what we're looking at is the ability for the individuals we serve to be able to novelly generate, put together a variety of communicative purposes and functions word by word, right? That they can choose what they want to talk about, how they want to share it. So the why of communication, several years ago, our colleague Janice Light wrote an article, and this is probably 35 years ago, thinking about what are the purposes of communication? Why do we even care that the individuals we serve are not able to communicate? And so here's a list that they can express wants and needs, and someone already mentioned that, to be able to gain and share information, to be able to develop and sustain relationships, which you often forget when we have these emergent communicators. It truly is about relationship, being able to engage in social etiquette. And then we can't forget that internal dialogue, their thinking, right, that is based in the language system. So we're going to talk a minute now, I mentioned it earlier, about the Communication Bill of Rights. So there's a group of individuals, it's a committee called the National Joint Committee for the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities. That's a long phrase, so we call it the NJC. And it's a group of 8 individuals that are representing 8 different groups in the United States that support individuals with complex needs. And years ago, they discovered they were serving the same population. So they thought, oh my gosh, we should be collaborating, and especially about communication. And so years ago, they put together a list of the Communication Bill of Rights, and that has recently been updated. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And these are the things I want you to consider. I'll go back to the Communication Bill of Rights in a second, but I also, if you've downloaded it, pulled it up on your own technology, we're going to ask some questions as we're reading them. We want you to think about, have you ever seen this before? What of the rights stands out to you? It's like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. And what rights are your students unable to fully access? Ultimately, we would want an environment where we talked about it being communicatively expected. We would want the Communication Bill of Rights, those rights and the descriptions of those rights available to our students. So hold those questions in your mind, and we'll go back to the Communication Bill of Rights. So let's look at the first 5. Your thoughts about those. What ones really strike you, or what ones, do you need to put in place in your classrooms? What ones might you not have thought about?
Pause your video. Look over the Communication Bill of Rights and answer the questions on slide 9 of your workbook.
Ooh, Marlene, can I start?
Absolutely. Go for it.
I'm looking right at number 1 and trying to imagine if you are unable to communicate, you're just socially isolated. So that's how we become close with people and have relationships, as we communicate with them. So that stuck out to me.
Absolutely. And that is one we often forget. Like, we're so worried about needs and wants and those kinds of things that we forget to build things into a communication system where they can interact and connect with others. All right, let's look at the next 5. So one that's important to me is the right to have communication acts acknowledged and responded to, even when the desired outcome cannot be realized. So I remember years ago, I was working with early childhood students in an ECSE classroom, and a couple of my parapros wanted to give lots of options, even if they couldn't have it, right? And one of my SLPs that I was working with said, no, they can't have that. Why even give them the option if they can't have it? And it was the best discussion in the world. And it ended up being about shopping. So, so we're not going to go shopping anymore just because we can't have that item. We still want to look at it. We want to dream about it. So that's always been a real important one to me.
I think one that we talked about before that a lot of people really kind of, felt that the right to be addressed directly and not be talked about, or talked about in the third person when that person is present. And I just have had a lot of experience with that, and I learned very early on how disrespectful that is to the person that you're talking about them when they're sitting right there in the room. They should really be a part of that conversation. And I see it happening way too many times. So I just think that's one that's really important to remember, that these people that, have communication, complex communication needs can still hear you talking about them.
So I have just a quick story. I was working with a young adult with complex needs, and we ended up getting an eye gaze system available for her. And it represented a couple of these so clearly. And the team, they got back to me, we got everything working, and they're like, yeah, there's a couple of things that are really not working out well. And I'm thinking it's the device, right? That, something technology wise. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Well, she's insisting now that before we move her, that we ask her permission. And she was in a wheelchair, and she really couldn't move herself. And I thought that was really intriguing. Okay, why is that a challenge? Well, we have to wait, right? So usually we just go. And so, we've got our ambulatory kids, and then we just go. And what they discovered, which is so impactful to me, is that she was having a nonverbal communication interaction she was chatting with a friend. And so they were doing it. They were looking at each other and kind of laughing. And then they'd like eye gaze some kid that's doing something and they'd laugh. And they had no idea this was happening. And so whenever they were ready for lunch, they just take her. And for her, you just interrupted my conversation. And the more eye gaze opportunities we gave her, the more she was able to articulate that to us, that was really an issue. For her. The other thing that they complained about is they said she doesn't want juice anymore. Now she's a young adult. I'm like, okay, what does she want? Well, she wants coffee. Like, well, so do all of us, right? But what we found out is they buy the juice ahead and they'd already bought it for the year. And so it was inconvenient, right, to not have juice. And we just kind of laughed. And I said, well, just ship it over to your early childhood programs. I'm sure they'll drink it all. But it was that kind of mindset that, well, she always has juice. That's what we've given her for, 15 years. So what's the deal? So again, it's honoring these communication rights and her being able to say, I'm not ready to be pushed right now, or I really don't want juice. The fun part is her dad, who was kind of a spitfire in his own right, had one of his employees at work bring her coffee every morning, because she asked for it. And so the next thing we know, there's coffee. And over time, the school developed a coffee bar. And so the students worked in it. And it was really fun, but it was one of those, I don't want juice anymore. So I want you to think about, as I go back to the slide deck here, how you're going to use this Communication Bill of Rights. Who are you going to share it with? Are you going to post it? Are you going to put it in your lesson plan? Are you going to read through them? Are you, depending on the age of your students, are you going to be thinking about teaching them that? I have some teams that when they start transitioning, junior high, high school, post-secondary, they ask them, are there any of these rights that you want to practice, right? That you want to work on? I worked with a group of individuals with Down syndrome that were post-secondary, young adults. And it was funny. They really wanted to work on ways to say no, right? I don't want to do that. I'm done with that. I don't want to go there. I don't really like that. And they were young adults and the families were with them. It was at a big conference for National Down Syndrome Conference. And it was funny because the adults, the parents were like, oh my gosh, we have taught them to be so compliant, right? So that they do well in school, they follow the directions, they're quiet, that we really did them a disservice. And some of the parents brought this up. They need to be able to boldly say no, to reject some interaction or whatever. And nowadays to keep themselves safe. But it was really intriguing to think about, who do we want to share it with? Who do we want to get their opinion? Who do we want to talk to about these rights? And so in your reflection form that hopefully you've downloaded and made a copy, you can tell it's evening now. What was your takeaway regarding a communication mindset? And what will you do with that knowledge? Who might you share that with? So take just a minute and think about that. Who you would like to share that information with.
You've reached the end of this video. Complete the communication mindset reflection on slide 11 of your workbook.